I love doing this. I love getting to meet all of you and to hear about what's going on all over the state of Florida in this crazy business that we're in. So let me just jump right into it and start off by saying that as much as I enjoy doing these, whatever the topic might be, I'm really excited today. As Latrez said, this is the first time we're doing this budget simulation for a group of county commissioners. And I know for many of you, not all of you, Commissioner Hahn, but for many of you, this will be the first time you actually sit, even in a simulated environment, to do a county budget. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I'm also really thrilled to be doing this this time around with Alan Rosenzweig, who I'm going to talk about in just a little while. He's our Deputy County Administrator. Alan, can you wave? See, you can. And so he's going to be working with us today. And of course, you've heard about the crack budget team that we've got with us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they did in the development of this game. But first of all, like I said, let's jump right into it. Let's face it, budgeting is frustrating, right? I mean, even budgeting in our household budgets can be frustrating. And think about that for a moment. You're doing that with your spouse, the person who you love more than anyone else in the world, and your decisions are exclusively yours, right? And you're dealing with your money, and you're on your timeline. Even with that, balancing a budget, even a household budget, and for that matter, even in my house, even talking about a household budget can be a frustrating, potentially combustible subject matter. But it's important. It's critically important in our household, and obviously it's critically important in the county. Now, the only thing that's different about doing a county budget versus your household budget is, let's see, it's not your money, right? All of the decisions aren't yours to be made exclusively by you. It's not your timeline. Let's see. Whereas in your household budget, you run the risk of making your spouse upset. In the county budget process, you run the risk of making who? Everyone upset. The competition for finite resources is far greater. And here's the big one. And this is the trap. This is the most difficult part of the county budget process. This is the most intoxicating part about the county budget process. Every appropriation you approve, you'll be celebrated for. And every revenue you raise to pay for that appropriation, you'll be demonized for. So that makes it kind of tough, doesn't it? And here's the real problem, because for some folks, naturally, you would prefer just to do the former, right? Approve the appropriations, get the love, and you might choose not to do the latter, which is to pay for it. And so that sets up an interesting dynamic. It's actually a very effective strategy politically if you don't plan to be around very long. And that's the only catch. If you don't plan to be around very long, then it could be an effective political strategy. But if you do, it'll catch up pretty quick. We'll talk a little bit about that. Therein lies the big problem. Let me see what I've got written down here. Because going back to that previous point, if there's one thing that Alan and I say during the budget process more than anything else to our commissioners, so much so that they just become, I could tell you, sick of hearing it, is that while the budget process is an annual process, it's a continuous process. Obviously, all of the decisions you make, all the actions you take or don't take, impact, or I would go as far as to say even determine your future budget options in future years. Everything you do this year is sure enough going to impact next year, and it's going to, again, determine actually your policy options and your budgetary options in years to come. So that's something we always have to, it sounds very basic, but it's something we always have to remind ourselves during the budget process that this is not a one-year in isolation exercise. And that sounds pretty basic, but I can tell you, even commissioners that I've worked with for 20 years will say, well, we're just going to do this year. And I always say, well, you know, I get it. We're just going to do this year, but it is going to either create or eliminate an option for you next year, because it's all tied together. And that all sound, and of course, having said that this is a continuous process, you are, yes, going to inherit, good and bad, the decisions that have been made before you got here. So that's just part of the job. So that all sounds sounds like a lot of pressure. Just to simplify things a little bit here, George W. Bush had a great way of simplifying things. He said, it's clearly a budget. It's got a lot of numbers in it, okay? That's one way to look at it. Jacob Lew came behind him, the Treasury Secretary, and he said the budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of values and aspirations. Well, that's probably a little bit more reflective statement of what the county budget is. And adopting a budget is one of the most important things that you all will do. And that's why we're here today. That's really why we're here at Leon County today, because we respect that and we appreciate that and how important this part of your job is in particular. And again, we hope to help. But there's an enormous amount of responsibility, obviously, in this process. There's also really an enormous amount of difficulty, but the difficulty is not arithmetic. The difficulty is in, again, trying to aggregate all of the conflicting and competing needs that you have given increasing demand and shrinking revenues. That's a difficult part. Try to aggregate all that in a way that your budget reflects something that resembles good public policy at the end of the day. That's the trick. That's the tough part. The other tough part is really you're not given any guidance in this process other than probably what your county has done, you know, for years before. The legislature or the statutes say you must adopt a budget. They don't tell you how. They don't tell you how to adopt. So budget processes, while we sort of all end up with the same forms at the end of the process that we plug our numbers into and that sort of thing, the budget processes really vary greatly from county to county. And I think that adds to the difficulty here a little bit as well. Let me see, other important little notes that I've had here. The budgeting part is easy, but how to balance sensitivity to the taxpayers with ensuring the long-term fiscal viability of the county. So how to balance taxpayer sensitivity to making appropriate investments in your community to ensure the long-term fiscal viability of the county. That's, again, the tough part. So budget simulation, let me get into the game. Given that it is tough, and I want to just sort of set that predicate, but given that it is tough, we didn't want you going into your process this year, perhaps for the first time, totally cold. When you're sitting up there and you're dealing, I was going to say playing, but I would never say playing, with millions of dollars. And let's face it, folks, you got elected, and I know you've all heard this a million times, but you got elected to a really important position, and most people just sort of understand it, but they really can't understand the magnitude of, you're dealing with millions of dollars on critical services that most people personally or professionally will never deal with in terms of the magnitude of the dollars we're talking about and the impact on critical life and death types of services. So we didn't want you going into that cold. So we've got this, the budget simulation game. Let me tell you a little bit about this game. We do a what we call a citizen engagement series in Leon County, where, you know, it's kind of like a Citizens Academy, and I know counties have those and that sort of thing. We sort of revamped ours a couple of years ago, and we wanted it to be really immersive. So like many of you, we heard, you know, during that time when we hit sort of the low point of the economy, and it really brought out the discontents, we heard a lot about you should do this and you shouldn't do that and this, that, and the other. And we said, how about we just turn everything on its head? How about we just go to the citizens and we not just present you PowerPoints on how we do things? Why don't we let you do them? And so we've actually got a simulation on development rights in Leon County where we do it with Legos. We say, here's a land development plan, here are your Legos. Red represents commercial square footage, blue represents residential, here's conservation. Go do it. Tell us what you come up with. Oh, okay, now we get it. You know what I mean? It's not as easy as just, no. Same here. We said, we've heard you loud and clear, but let's sit down and balance the budget. The first time we did this game, I have to tell you a quick story. The first time we did this simulation, we were on the south side of town, remember, Chris? And we had probably 60, 70 people in the room, and we convened, and we didn't know how this would work or if this would work. How do you from scratch create a board game that does anything like simulate all of the dynamics of a budget process? So we did this, and we got it going, and I left that night. I had to go run over and teach a class at Florida State that I committed to. So I ran over there with my fingers crossed, and I ran back at the end of the night. And as I was walking in the door, the citizens were standing up at their tables with microphones, sort of just feeding out on how they balanced and what their experience was. And I saw a lady from across the room who was kind of a, let's just say among friends here, she was kind of a usual malcontent at county commission meetings and that sort of thing. And as I walked into the room, she said the following: I would never want to be a county commissioner. And I said, we did it. We got it. Yeah, we did. Success. We achieved what we set out to do. And so that was our experience with it. Let me just tell you that as part of that citizen engagement series, as I mentioned to you, I tasked the OMB, and you have a member of our Office of Management Budget staff at each of your tables, tasked them with creating this board game, again, which is as closely as possible simulates the entire, several month long budget process. And folks, I am shocked at how closely, after doing county budgets for 20 years, how closely this simulates the real environment of the budget process. So absent perhaps maybe the folks that come to the lectern and pound on it and that sort of thing, we can add that in the longer version of the simulation, but absent that, it's pretty darn close. Let me just say, and let me also just thank this budget team first, and let me also say this about this budget team. Each one of them are very happily employed at Leon County government. There's no amount of money, probably no amount of remuneration that could get them to leave Leon County government for any reason whatsoever. Thank you for saying that. No, and so let me. With that, I want to bring up my right-hand guy, Alan Rosenzweig. Alan is like the budget genius of county government. He's not arguing with me. Alan did, Alan was formerly. He's a lot older than he looks, folks, too. And he was formerly at Pinellas County government in their budget office. He was before that at Sarasota County government in their budget office. Two places where they have all the money in the world. Then we brought him here to little old poor Leon County and made life really difficult for him. But Alan is considered, one of the top budget guys in the state. He's called upon all the time over at the legislature to lend his expertise to any number of really tricky budget issues. And when it gets really difficult, I help him out. With that, Alan, take it away.
So we were told, though, before we get in the budget game, that this is a CCC. You need credits, so you have to actually learn something about budgeting, county budgeting, before you dive into the game. So we're going to make this quick and painless for you. We have for you the top 10 things you all need to know as a county commissioner when it comes to budgeting. And we'll make these very quick if my slideshow works here. Number 10, Fund, not fun, accounting. One of the things you need to understand, and a lot of you probably haven't done governmental budgeting yet, and then we're all newly elected, your budget will be set up using a thing called fund accounting. Basically, they're little self-balancing sets of accounts. It's a way that Florida law requires us to show discrete revenues going to discrete expenses. So your gas taxes will go in a separate place to fund your roads. If you have a fire department and you're running a fire fee, you'll keep that in a separate pot of money. It's a good way for you to show the citizens where specific revenues are going to fund specific programs. At the same time, you'll probably have a general fund. In it will be your general property taxes and will fund all the general operations of government. But again, you're going to see these terms in your budget process here called fund accounting. You'll probably have a series of individual funds, and that's how you'll balance your budget at the fund level. Number 9, yes, fund, it's still not fun, fund balances. You're going to hear that a lot, and you'll hear that today. Fund balances are the government's fancy way of saying reserves. These are money you have in the bank, and the reason they're called fund balances is because you have fund accounting, so we use that language. You'll start hearing that. Your budget office might call it unallocated reserves. You'll see it in your financial statements, but they're your savings account. And what we use them for is cash flow. It basically keeps your government running until your property taxes come in. Your property taxes usually don't start flowing in until November. You need money to fund the government for October and November until the cash gets there. Also, if you're going for a bond, the bond rating agencies also look at the strength of your government on how your reserves are doing compared to your policies. So it's a very important thing to be aware of. You have them, and you're going to see them simulated today in your budget game. Number 8, the budget process. You need one, and your staff has one, I'm sure. But it helps keep everybody on track. There's a calendar, there's statutory requirements. You'll be working with your constitutional officers. Everybody plays according to a calendar, and a process is very important to keep it flowing. Number 7, capital projects. These are necessary infrastructure. Your roads, your libraries, typically you'll have a 5-year plan. You'll plan out your needs of your community, and you'll know what's coming down the pike. As Vince said early on, every budget is dependent on the previous one. This is going the other way. You're looking into the future. You might start bagging money up for a jail in year 1, a little money each year, and at the end of year 5, you have enough money to build that jail. So you'll have a 5-year capital plan. It's something that's required. And when it comes to capital projecting, we do have a little chart for you. You can choose any 2. You can have good, cheap, fast, good, but you can't edit all of those. So just be very deliberate when you're looking at your capital projects. That was supposed to be humorous. All right, I obviously, like David Letterman, I need the applause and laugh card. All right, so now let's move into number 6, recurring and non-recurring. Very important to understand. You generally have recurring revenues and you have non-recurring revenues. Your non-recurring are typically those fund balances. You typically want to line up your recurring revenues with your recurring expenditures. Generally, running the jail is a recurring expense. Building a jail is a one-time thing. You typically do not want to use those one-time money, those fund balances, or a windfall somewhere to fund the ongoing operations of government. That will catch up with you, and it won't be pretty when it does. Number 5, 95%. The Florida statutes are very clear. The budget offices will estimate the best they can using the expertise they have, how much money they think you're going to collect in a given year. If they think you're going to collect $100 in property taxes, the statutes say you can only budget 95. It kind of protects you from bad forecasting. But on the positive side, it lets you accumulate some of those fund balances. So if the budget office is right, and they thought it was going to be 100 and you budget 95, you end up with 5 extra at the end of the year. That goes in the bank and it goes into your fund balances. We have a little quote here to help you out with that. We didn't actually overspend our budget. The allocation simply fell short of our expenditure. Now you guys are getting the humor. This is good. This is good. All right. Moving on. Number 4, setting your property tax rate. Probably one of the most single important things you're going to do in the year. Everybody, this is one of the things, the dynamics of your budget. You've got your property tax rate, and then you got the value your property appraiser gives you. The function of those two together, when you multiply those two together, that's how much revenue you're going to collect. You all will be responsible for establishing that tax rate and determining how much revenue you need to run your government. The property appraiser gives you the value independent of you. You all, independent of everybody else, get to set that rate. One of the most important things you're going to need to do. In looking at that, there's a thing called trim. Let me give you a little graphic right here. I just said a trim. So trim is very basic, but trim stands for truth and millage, not cutting whatever that is. Truth and millage. It's the way the statutes lay out how you set your tax rate, how you inform your citizens, how you do everything relating to setting that tax rate. There are statutory requirements and deadlines and mailings and all sorts of good things that you have professional staff that'll make sure it gets done right. Very important. If you get it wrong, Department of Revenue can make you go back and do it all again or make you go back to last year's budget. It's very important to get this right, and you have professionals who do this for a living. But you're going to hear that term, the TRIM process. It just stands for truth and millage, nothing more, nothing less. That's when the citizens get their statement. It shows them what their taxes would be or could be and things of that nature. But again, a lot of people will be working on that for you. Whoops, didn't go too quick here. Let's go back one. Those pesky constitutional officers. We have no pesky constitutional officers in here. Okay, those are your supervisor elections, your tax collector, property appraiser, clerk, and sheriff. The beauty is they don't set the tax rates, but you all fund them. And the Florida statutes runs the gamut of your relationship and responsibility for oversight of their budget. From the supervisor elections, where you literally have almost all control over their budget ultimately. They submit a budget to you in a public session. You can cut the supervisor's budget if the political will is there, and they have no appeal rights beyond you. You're it. You can do it, but again, it's another elected official and your relationships are important. Goes to the other gamut where the tax collector and property appraiser, ostensibly the Department of Revenue signs off on their budget. The sheriff, you sign off, but they have appeal rights to the cabinet, the administrative commission. And then the clerk, it's a hybrid relationship. The most important thing is an incredible working relationship with your staff, with those elected officials in their office, and your relationship. By and large, that's the bulk of your entire property tax, your general fund property tax. On average in the state, over 65% of that countywide property tax rate you set is funding another elected official's office. But again, you have a wide array of responsibility as it comes to it. You have dates you can require they submit. You can have a certain amount of information you want. But at the end, it's that relationship and where they can go if they don't like what you do. Sheriffs, notoriously, there's a couple of hot spots around the state where they always end up in a fight, and they sometimes end up in front of the cabinet to work it out. And then when they make that decision, they'll tell you what the budget is and you will fund it. So it's much better, obviously, if you can avoid that dynamic. And lastly, balanced. You, by law, we're not the federal government, you have to balance your budget. It's that basic. And you have to have your anticipated revenues equal your anticipated expenditures. And as Vince was saying, one of the most hard things you do is dealing with constituents. So as I wrap up before we get in the game, I'm going to leave you with probably one of the most important quotes you're going to need as it relates to budgeting from one of our former presidents. Balancing the budget is a little like protecting your virtue. You just have to learn to say no. And I highly recommend that as you move forward with your budget process. That is probably the hardest thing you're going to need to do as it relates to your budget. So that's my quick part of your CCC. Scott, Chris, we cover everything we need to cut relates to budget? All right, so now we're going to talk about the budget game. So what you have in front of you is this board. I'm going to go fairly quickly through the overview of the game. You have the technical experts at the table who will kind of reset it for you. But as Vince said, we try to simulate all the elements of a budget process in a 45-minute exercise. So let's set it up. The purpose of the game, to balance a budget that funds services and specific priorities, use a combination of strategies among specific challenges. Let's walk through it here. Here is, and you're not playing against each other though, I suspect you will be by the end. You can get a maximum of 3 points at your table. You'll get 1 point for balancing your budget. You'll get another point if you fund the table's priority. And you'll get a third point if you stay within your policy minimums for reserves. So the most you can get is 3. You can get negatives. If you don't balance your budget, it's -1. If you blow your reserve policy, it's minus another 1. So again, the goal of your table, if you can do it, is to get 3 points. Within it, you're going to start with $20 in your reserve. You'll have that right there. The policy minimum is $15. You can try to fund a priority. Your table will facilitate discussion on a priority. It will cost you $1 to fund a priority, but if you can do it, that's even better. And then there will be challenges. And you are not debatable. We will give you challenges just like you will be challenged during your budget process. Things will happen when you back in your county are balancing your budget that will come your way that you did not anticipate. Just like that's going to happen today. When they come your way, you have no choice. You must deal with them. You're going to have different opportunities. You have a series of 2 decks of cards in front of you. One are revenues, one are expenditures. In both stacks, you have the ability to increase revenue, decrease revenue, increase expenditures, decrease expenditures. You as a sitting commission will have to vote, get a majority to move anything forward. So that's one of your revenues, and there's an example of an expenditure. Again, very basic. So the board, you're trying to move to that line right there, to balance.
I should say, Alan,
yes, sir.
cards that you all have?
Oh, were real Leon County issues.
They'll look really familiar.
Exactly.
You had to make them up.
Nope, it was very basic.
They're actual issues.
So you're going to move our little Leon County medallion back and forth. The analysts will at your table will help you facilitate moving it. Your goal is just to get that medallion to balance. So let's set up the game for you. The budget picture. We've brought the numbers to a very basic level, but pretty darn close on a scale match us. The current budget, the year you're living in now, you got $100 in revenues, $100 expenditures. The budget is balanced. You're going now into your planning stage for next year. The budget picture, to open the door, the cost to open government generally is going to increase. You have increases in retirement, you have increases in healthcare, you have increases in CPI, you have contractual obligations, your constitutionals want more money. Your cost to open the doors next year we're projecting is $106. So our revenues are going to go up a little, 101. You got a $5 shortfall to start. That's the hole you're in. We all know that you guys clearly are scrutinizing everything and have charged your county administrator with dealing with these issues. So right off the bat, to save you that aggravation at the table, we have squeezed out all the waste, fraud, and abuse in every county budget. And we're going to save you $1 right off the top. Boom. So instead of being in a hole 5, we've hole in 4. So you don't have to worry about that conversation at the table. We've done that for you already. So as we move forward here, Felisa, we're going to balance. And I'm hopefully going to get a clock here. Am I?
Let me say, Alan, too, before you go,
yes.
You say go, obviously you've got everybody at your table. You got
right.
As Alan said, you got the expert at the table. We'll see how quickly we can go and wrap up the stuff because we also want to, as long as Latrez will let us, stay here afterwards to answer any questions you have on anything leading up to your budget cycle.
Right, so we're going to go 45 minutes. Your clock starts now. We'll try to get the clock on the screen going. 45 minutes. Balance, people.